Welcome to Darkwatch Stories, where we bring to life the chills, the shadows, and the mysteries that linger in the dark. If you enjoy spine-tingling stories and want to support the journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now, sit back, dim the lights, and let's step into tonight's story. My name is David. If anyone asks, I'll say I'm a Lighthouse keeper, which sounds romantic, but really just means I'm a maintenance guy living in the middle of the sea. The government says satellites and automation have made our kind obsolete. Even so, there are a few lights they refuse to leave unmanned. Too far, too old, or too strange. I was assigned to the third type, though when I signed the contract, I didn't really understand what strange meant. I never dreamed about the sea or drew lighthouses as a kid. I just liked machines, wires, anything rusted that would work again if you kicked it right. I've done all kinds of jobs: loading docks, repair work, night shifts for a freight company, trips on fishing boats where no one asked questions as long as the nets came up full. I don't care where I live as long as the paycheck comes and people leave me alone. This job paid more than it should, enough for me to ignore how suspicious it felt. My teeth have been bad lately. Anything cold sends a spike through my skull. When your gums hurt every time you chew, you stop being choosy about work. I took this job through a contractor with no website, no ads. If you want to hear about it, you have to listen to old men at the docks, washed up sailors, people who know where to look. The application was a few lines, no diplomas, no references, just coordinates and one sentence. Keep the systems running. Don't let the light go out. The trip out took 3 hours on a small supply boat bucking across a gray sea. After 40 minutes, the shore disappeared. Just water and sky. The man piloting the boat never gave his name, never asked mine. When we arrived, he helped me haul a few crates, pointed out the supply room, handed me a thin manual, and went back down to the boat. I managed to ask, "When will you be back to pick me up?" He stared off in another direction, pretending not to hear. Now I live here. The entire island is a block of rock shoved up out of the water. No trees, no sand, not a single bird. Just the lighthouse, a metal dock, and a storage shed bolted into stone. The tower has 5 levels: storage, generator, living quarters, watch room, and at the top, the lamp. It always smells like salt and half-burned wiring. When the wind hits right, the walls groan like old bones. Most days crawl by. I check the systems: generator, backup batteries, the motor that rotates the lens, the rubber seals that keep out salt water. I run diagnostics, make sure the light fires every 45 seconds. Everything here orbits that beam. I eat canned food, instant noodles, meat that expired a few labels ago. The room came with some books from the previous keeper, a couple of science texts, some mediocre sci-fi. There's a radio, but it only picks up weather reports and a dead emergency frequency. My phone doesn't get so much as a ghost of a signal. Sometimes I think maybe they've forgotten about me. But every 2 weeks, right on schedule, a boat comes near enough to drop off crates on the dock. They don't shout, don't wave. It's just enough to remind me that somewhere, someone knows I exist and is still transferring money to a nameless lighthouse tech in the middle of nowhere. The only other person out here is Joey. I never asked for a partner. I took this job precisely because I wanted to be alone. But a few days after I arrived, Joey showed up like he'd stepped out of some other story. He doesn't appear on any official contractor list. His name isn't in the manual, but there's a second bunk in my room and a brass plate on the door that reads, Joseph H. Mallory. Like this rock had been waiting for him. Joey says he's here for maintenance too, to keep an eye on the systems. But he talks more than everyone I've ever met combined. And most of what he talks about has nothing to do with wires or motors. He talks about treasure. According to Joey, this lighthouse was built on top of a Spanish galleon that sank in 1722, hauling gold from some forgotten temple. The ship didn't just go down, it was dragged under, he says, by a curse or something worse. Joey's great-grandfather was a diver who vanished in these waters looking for that same wreck. Joey grew up on those stories. Now he says he's continuing the family business, though I've never seen him in a wetsuit or with a tank on his back. Instead, he stays up late glued to the sonar screen, muttering about coordinates. The walls of his room are covered in maps, yellowed photocopies, current charts, pencil marks connecting in spiderweb patterns. Joey talks like he stepped out of an old radio drama. He says things like, by thunder, blasted contraption, and she'll not stay down forever. The first time I heard him, I laughed, thought he was joking. He wasn't. That's how men used to talk, he said. They respected the sea and they knew their vocabulary. I didn't argue, but he's not just some romantic idiot. He reads Moby Dick, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Treasure Island, and quotes them whenever he feels like it. Joey is convinced this lighthouse doesn't just warn ships away. He thinks it's a lid, holding something down. He points out how the tides here pull in two directions, how every compass goes crazy near the coordinates. He says locals call these waters the mouth of the sea. I checked old reports once. The name is real. So are the missing ships, and the way captains try to give this patch of ocean a wide berth. The supply boat arrives twice a month, regular as a heartbeat. They drop off food, water, fuel, and a stapled stack of system updates. They never tie up for long. Sometimes I wave. They pretend to be busy with the ropes. Joey says they're scared of this place. Scared of the tall white tower with its light that never stops turning. Stuck in the middle of the sea like a gravestone. I figure they're just being professional. They get paid to come, and probably paid more to leave quickly. On paper, the current lighthouse was built in 1903. The records also mention 3 earlier structures. One toppled in a storm, one caught fire, one simply grew old and collapsed. Joey says that's all lies. He swears there was a first tower, much older, built in the exact same spot. It didn't burn, didn't crumble, didn't fall, it disappeared. The concrete base we stand on now, he says, sits right on the skeleton of a wreck. The gold never moved. It was just chained into the rock with rituals nobody understands anymore. I don't care about gold or curses. I care that the lamp turns every 45 seconds, that the engine sounds healthy, that the breaker panel doesn't fry itself. Out here, one mistake means one body. There's no rescue team, no relief shift, just a bit of concrete, a skeleton of steel rocking in the swells, and 2 men trying not to lose their grip on reality. To make that possible, I made myself a set of rules. My rule 1 started out very simple. Always check the light and the sonar. Boring, sure, but it saved my life more times than I can count. People think a lighthouse is just the beam sweeping the sea, but out here, The sonar net under the shelf is just as important. It listens for movement below, all the way down to the lip of a trench that official charts pretend not to see too clearly. The sonar system was put in during the 80 seconds, after a cluster of disappearances within 10 nautical miles. Cargo ships, fishing boats, private vessels, anything you could imagine. The weather records from those nights weren't disaster level. The routes were well known, and when they vanished, hardly a splinter of wood turned up. At first, everyone blamed human error, old equipment, fog. Then came talk of magnetic interference, radio anomalies. Fancy words that still didn't explain a damn thing. In 1986, every sonar station in the area picked up something at the same time. The signal came from the floor of the trench, deeper than previous scans had gone. 3 pulses, low frequency, slow, steady. Not a whale call, not a machine. It rose almost straight up from below. Engineers tore through the logs, checked the hardware, verified power levels. No errors. It was filed away as an unidentified phenomenon. After that, the net got upgraded, power boosted. Like they were bracing for the day it might happen again. They also added one line to the orientation guidelines for new keepers. Keep the light on, keep the sonar clean, and don't stare out too long when the screen suddenly goes white. When I first read it, I laughed. It sounded like someone's idea of a joke. After a few months out here, I realized they weren't joking. I folded that line into Rule 1, half technical, half superstition. In this job, those two overlap a lot more than you think. The sonar room is on the 2nd floor. 4 monitors, 1 keyboard, a switchboard, a backup battery bank tied into the generator. The system auto-scans every 6 hours unless we trigger it manually. Each scan is compared with the last clean record. Anything that grows larger, moves, or rises in the water column gets flagged. My job is to log it. Fish, schools, drifting junk, currents, the occasional lost shipping container or pod of whales. Joey never just logs it. He prints the sonar shots, circles sections, tapes them on his wall until the room looks like the inside of a conspiracy nuts shed. He says there are patterns, cycles. As long as he still remembers to refuel the generator, I let him have his patterns. Out here, you either find a way to stay busy or you go insane. Joey picked treasure maps and monster charts as his therapy. That morning, we ran the first scan of the day together. A few small bright smudges showed fish, warm water eddies, nothing unusual. No visitors, I said, sipping coffee. Joey tapped the screen. At least the big fella's not awake. He smirked. I ignored him. I don't like him calling anything down there the big fella. I'm used to machines having names, not shadows in a deep trench. He dug out an old print, pointed to a strange indentation that had appeared back in March. Here, same coordinates. It rose, paused, then dropped. His voice dropped too. I said it was probably a scan glitch. He shook his head. If it's wrong, it's been wrong for a long time. This feels like it looked up and changed its mind. We went back and forth for a bit, until I decided to let it go. Some conversations just make you colder the longer they run. You know what our job really is? I asked, trying to steer us away from that trench. What? Joey raised an eyebrow, polishing light bulbs and babysitting a sonar fence, I said, handing him his 3rd coffee. He chuckled. You think too small, David. That's your problem. And you think everything is prophecy. I shot back. He shrugged. One of us will be right eventually. I honestly didn't know which outcome I'd prefer. Rule 1 made the days blur into a hypnotic pattern. Light turns, sonar pings, logs get updated. The routine ran so long, I started forgetting why we did it in the first place. Until one night, the sea went flat as glass, the wind died, and the sonar alarm began to shriek. That's the night Rule 2 started to mean something. It's also the first time I learned that don't stare too long when the screen goes white can apply to Windows as well. Rule 2 is printed right there in the manual. Page 4, sandwiched between breaker inspections and flare protocols. Just one line. Rule 2, beware the Kraken. No explanation. No footnote. When I first saw it, I underlined it and laughed. Assumed some bored tech slipped it in as a joke. 2 weeks later, the laughter stopped. What we saw that night didn't match anything in my memory of whales, ships, or storms. That night, the sea was so calm I could hear the relay clicking each time the lamp rotated. No wind, no waves slamming against the rock. Even the lighthouse's usual creaks went quiet. I was in the sonar room, running a late sweep for peace of mind. The screen lit up, displaying a rising mass from the trench, not fast, but massive, big enough to push every other return off the display. A dense shape, undefined, climbing meter by meter from the abyss. I thought the system had failed. Or maybe the power was spiking. But the panel was all green. No flickers, no hum out of place. Then the steel floor beneath my boots began to vibrate. Not storm vibration, no roaring wind, no crashing surf. This felt like pressure being applied from beneath the stone itself, testing the strength of the foundation. I shouted for Joey. He was already halfway up the stairs, face pale like he'd been waiting for this. We stared out of the round watch window. About 60 meters off the rock, the surface bulged as if something huge swam just under it. A dark smear broke the thin mist, and from it, something rose that looked like the trunk of a tree if a tree were wet and flexible. A tentacle, black, or so dark it swallowed the light, glistening with seawater. The underside was lined with suckers as big as dinner plates, some crusted with barnacles and shells. The tentacle slithered onto the rock, moving slowly like it was feeling out the terrain. When it touched the base of the tower, the steel groaned deep in its bones. I felt the whole structure tilt, not much, but enough that my stomach dropped. Neither of us said a word. For a minute that felt like an hour, the tentacle just lay there, loosely coiled around the foundation, like a hand resting against a chest, feeling for a heartbeat. The water around it no longer looked like ocean. It turned murky, blackish, thick as oil. A sharp, sour stench crept in through the cracks. I marked the time in the logbook, my handwriting uglier than usual. When the tentacle eventually slid back into the water, it left behind a slick of dark fluid floating on the surface. The beam swept over it once, then it too vanished. The sea went flat again, silent as if nothing had emerged from the trench at all. I turned to Joey. "What the hell was that?" My voice came out rough and too quiet. Joey didn't answer right away. He watched the last ripples recede, then turned and clapped me on the back like we just fixed a pipe. "That, my boy, was a kraken." He grinned so wide the lines at his eyes carved deep into his face. He said it like he'd finally met an old friend. I couldn't laugh. Kraken felt too small for what we'd just seen. You ever seen it before? I asked. Joey shook his head. Heard about it? Read it in the logs. 20 years of waiting, worth every damn second. He spoke like he'd just ticked off the last item on a bucket list. Then he headed downstairs, muttering to himself about depth, cycle, next time. I stayed in the watchroom alone, staring at the spot where the water had gone black, convincing myself the tower had stopped shaking. The next morning, I went down to the record storage. In the corner, there was a low cabinet crammed with old logbooks, supply requests, fuel tallies. In the very bottom drawer, I found a small wooden box. Inside were 3 cloth-wrapped notebooks, their covers marked only with dates. No station number, no supervisor, stamps more like private journals than official logs. I carried them back upstairs and opened them one by one. Every page was thick with handwriting. Weather notes, scan times, stray remarks, simple sketches of the trench. Scattered through them were entries about large movement near bottom, metal under strain, structure vibrating without visible cause. One keeper sketched a tentacle clinging to the rock with a note, "You don't want to be here when it tests its strength." Another listed side effects after each event: brownouts, radio interference, days of missing wildlife near the island. In one notebook, the keeper had drawn a calendar. Certain squares shaded dark the dates of Kraken sightings. The gaps between them weren't even. Some events were 60 years apart, others 42. It felt like whatever lived down there only needed to surface occasionally to check that things above were still in place. I didn't show Joey the notebooks. He already believed more than he should. After that night, I spent more time with the sonar. I double-checked the depth readouts, paid close attention to any returns that rose, paused, then sank again. I stopped thinking of the sonar as a fence. It felt more like an ear bolted to the edge of a bottomless throat, listening for something shifting in the dark. Rule 1 was still about equipment, but it started to feel like a kind of prayer too. Please, stay down there. If the Kraken makes us look down, Rule 3 exists to keep us from listening too closely to what comes from the surface. Rule 3: ignore the sirens. I read about it in the old journals, heard fishermen mention it while the supply boat idled offshore, and I saw what happens when people don't listen. That story began on one of the thickest fog days I've ever seen, when even the lighthouse beam felt smothered. The fog rolled in like smoke from underwater. Within 10 minutes, the world shrank to a small circle of light around the tower. Our radio picked up a faint distress signal somewhere about 7 nautical miles away. The voice belonged to Roger, a fisherman from Street. George is several hours away by boat. His wife had died 3 years earlier. That night, he told his neighbors he heard her calling from out at sea. They tried to stop him, but he left the dock in a small skiff with no lights, no GPS. The next morning, both Roger and his boat were gone in the fog. The rescue teams were too far out to respond quickly, so they called us. It's our corner of the map. Joey and I checked the sonar. Just empty water. Nothing big. Just the usual scatter. We went out anyway. Sometimes this job is changing bulbs. Sometimes it's looking for someone hanging between life and death. We divided the search grid into circles, running the boat around the last known coordinates. The fog twisted everything. The engine sounded like it was below us. The slap of water against the hull felt too close. Joey stood at the bow, knuckles white on the rail, eyes straining for any color that wasn't gray. I held the radio, listening for any repeats of Roger's signal and trying not to think about the trench yawning under us. We found Roger's boat at 10:42 a.m. It was upside down, half sunk, its pale blue hull bobbing like the flayed belly of a whale. Roger lay draped over it, fingers dug so hard into the wood they were bleeding. His life jacket was gone. He was still breathing, but his eyes were wide, staring past us into the fog. We hauled him aboard, wrapped him in blankets, asked him what happened. He only said one sentence: "She called me." Later, the doctor said he was dehydrated, sleep-deprived, stressed. The paperwork called it exhaustion and disorientation. Joey wasn't impressed. On the ride back, he told me many keepers used to carry beeswax to plug their ears. When the tides felt wrong, or after nights when the ocean was too calm, others recited psalms or played old music loud enough to fill every corner, all because they were afraid of hearing something familiar. "Sirens," Joey said quietly. "Not the half-fish maidens in paintings, just voices, but they know which voice to pick." In the old journals, I found lines like, "Heard my mother calling from the rocks. She's been dead 10 years. Another keeper wrote, "Don't answer. Don't look. Don't open the door." On one page, there were only 3 words: "Singing. Low. Close." Those words gave me goosebumps even when the sun was out. The Coast Guard has a technical term: auditory hallucination phenomenon. They blame matched frequencies, wind, and neurological fatigue. They say the brain mixes wave noise, rock echoes, and machinery into something that sounds like a human voice, then slaps the memory of a dead loved one on top. On paper, it all sounds reasonable. Meanwhile, the old men in the harbor bar still call it temptation. They say the sea doesn't shout, it sings, and it sings to the right person on the right night. I've never heard it. Or if I have, I've forced myself to call it wind. Joey hasn't been so lucky. One night, I found him in the common room with headphones on, hooked up to a battered cassette player that belonged in a museum. I asked what he was listening to. "Noise," he said. "As long as it's not him." I didn't have to ask who him was. In his notebook later, he'd scrawled, "Last night heard my grandfather call from the eastern rocks. He died when I was 12. Since then, my own headphones never stray far. Sometimes I play music, sometimes I just turn on static. Meaningless sound is better than silence, where your mind can invent voices." Every night before I sleep, I check the locks on the upper doors, making sure none of them sticks. I avoid the windows when the sea is too calm. Rule 3 doesn't appear in the official manual, but it's as important to me as checking the oil level. When you live where a monster lurks below and the surface might sing in your own voice, the last thing you want is for your eyes to see something they shouldn't. That's where Rule 4 comes in. Joey named them dead ships. The first time he saw one was during a 3 a.m. watch. A faint blue glow in the fog, gliding along the surface like a reflection with no solid ship to reflect. At first, Joey thought it was some trick of the weather moonlight, maybe, or a fishing boat's beam bouncing off the mist. Then he looked closer. There were people on the deck, Not just one shapeless blur, but several figures moving back and forth. One pushed a mop over an invisible wet patch. Another coiled a rope that didn't exist. A third leaned over the railing, staring into a sea that barely rippled. When the lighthouse beam swept across them, the ship vanished. "Don't let the light touch them," Joey told me. "When you see one, kill the lamp." There's no mention of this anywhere in the manual. Officially, we're only supposed to turn off the light for maintenance or power saving. But after I saw my first dead ship, I understood why previous keepers broke protocol and made their own secret rules. Some things aren't meant to be illuminated. The night I saw one, the radar was empty, sonar flat. The sea was so still, the returns looked like noise. I was doing my usual walk around the watchroom, glancing through the windows in all four directions. When I looked north, I saw a dim blue smudge floating in the fog, not blinking like normal navigation lights, but a steady glow wrapping around a hull with no flag and no number. It drifted along as if the world was on slow motion, threading between thicker patches of fog. On deck, the ghostly crew kept working. One figure crouched, scraping at the floor with invisible tools. Another stood where a wheel should have been, hands turning it back and forth. It didn't look like ghosts. It didn't look like living sailors. It looked like someone had stuck the last few seconds of a ship's life on repeat. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the lamp switch. The rotating lens kept turning, the next sweep only seconds away from hitting that position. I yanked the lever. The light cut out. The motor slowed. For a brief moment, the only illumination came from the dead ship itself, the blue glow painting the ceiling of the watchroom and our faces. It glided past the rock and disappeared behind the tower. I counted slowly to 30 before turning the light back on. Nothing remained. What I felt afterward wasn't fear. It was guilt. I had willingly shut off the only warning sign in these waters, the only thing telling real ships, stay away from the rocks. I had done something every manual, every training lecture says never to do. But deep down, I knew it was the right choice. The old logbook entries echoed in my mind. Light caught the bow. It vanished. But for a moment, I saw something else behind them. Something not meant for human eyes. Locals have lots of names for them. Drifters, sea lanterns, gliders. An old fisherman with shaking hands once told us, "Don't stare. You stare long enough, you'll see someone you know among them." I still don't know if he was just trying to spook us or telling the truth. Either way, every time a dead ship appears, I only look long enough to figure out its path. Then I do what every keeper after 1919 has done. I turn off the light and wait. I call them something else, just to trick myself into thinking they're fiction. Black pearls, stolen from that old pirate movie where the cursed ship can never dock. Joey likes the name, says it sounds cinematic. His grin doesn't hide the way his fingers crush the railing whenever the blue haze emerges. We started noticing a pattern. Dead ships don't follow the tides. They come on nights when the sea is too quiet and you can hear the lighthouse breathing. One logbook from 1919 has a detailed entry that stands out from the rest. That keeper wrote, "Blue vessel beyond fog line. Crew working as if unaware of their state. Turned lamp off, let it pass. Second time, Turned lamp on too early. Light touched the bow. Ship disappeared instantly. In that instant, saw something behind them. The next line is scratched out so many times it's impossible to read. At the bottom of the page, he wrote, "Not for us, not meant to be seen." A week later, the same book says, "Can't sleep. Every time I close, eyes see it again. Can't eat. Leaving post early." The station's official records state that Keeper jumped from a rock half a mile away. They found his body wedged in a tide pool, eyes open. Some stories never make it into the manuals. They get boiled down into one dry instruction: don't stare too long when the screen goes white. And we're left to figure out the rest. After months out here, my 4 rules became clear. Always check the light and the sonar, and don't stare when the screen goes white. Beware the Kraken, it's real, and it remembers where the tower's base is. Ignore the sirens, no matter whose voice they borrow. Turn off the light when you see the dead ships. Don't light the way for those who've already lost their way. Simple on paper. In practice, following them feels like negotiating with something bigger than the horizon. Not every keeper sticks to those rules long enough to get officially rotated out. Some requests transfer after a few months, citing family reasons. Some vanish, leaving their logbooks up to date. Kettle still warm. A chair rocking gently in the common room. The supply crew arrives to find the light turning, the radio working, and no keeper. The contractor calls it unexplained disappearance. Joey says they were called home. I used to think most of what Joey said was filler, a way to crowd out the silence with treasure tales, curses, diver ancestors, scribbled maps. But the more nights I survived here, the more lines from the old journals crawled under my skin. The less I argued, especially after the Kraken wrapped a tentacle around the foundation. After that, anytime the tower trembled, I stopped blaming the wind so quickly. One night, I got a taste of 3 things at once: sonar failure, a voice in the noise, and a dead ship approaching. The sonar suddenly went white, lines of static rolling down the screen like a scream without sound. The radio bled a strange tone, like someone dragging out my name again and again. Outside, to the west, that faint blue glow started slipping into the lamp's path. I stood in the watchroom, one hand on the lamp switch, the other pressing my headphones tight, cranking the static as loud as it would go. Joey yelled something behind me, but the noise swallowed his words. The voice on the radio shifted, changed into a tone I knew too well, a man I'd tried hard to forget. The boss who'd fired me from my last job before this one. Someone I had hated with a quiet, constant rage. Somehow, hearing his voice crawl out of the static made me want to answer. For a fraction of a second, I understood why people open doors for dead voices. It's not naivety. It's unfinished feelings, love, hate, regret. The sea only needs one loose thread to get a grip. In front of me, the dead ship's glow drifted closer, seconds away from the next sweep of the lamp. Rule 3 and Rule 4 crashed into each other in my head. I did the only thing that felt right. I yanked the radio's power cord out of the wall. The voice cut off mid-syllable. At the same moment, I slammed down the lamp switch. Once again, the only light on that stretch of sea disappeared, and darkness poured in like ink. In that blackness, the dead ship sailed past, its blue glow painting Joey's face and making him look like a drowned man. We stood there, counting our heartbeats in place of seconds. When the light came back on, the sonar rebooted and the radio stayed silent. No more voice, no more ship, just waves returning to the rocks like they'd never left. Joey looked at me and said nothing. We polished off a pot of cold coffee without a word between us. The next morning, I opened my notebook and added a shaky line under the 4 rules. If you have to break one rule to uphold the others, choose the one that blinds you the least. As time passed, we started recounting these incidents half-jokingly, like we were preparing training material for some successor who might never arrive. Listen, Joey said one day, drumming his fingers on the table. If they drop some new kid off here tomorrow, what's the first thing you tell him? I thought for a while. Check the light. Check the sonar. Don't trust what you hear when the water is too calm, I answered. It surprised me how deeply I believe that. Joey would tell it differently. He'd talk about treasure, about that Spanish galleon dragged down by something that never wanted to be stolen from. He'd point to his walls full of maps, mention his vanished diver ancestor, the sonar readings of the big shadow under the trench right where the lighthouse stands. He'd say, "We're not just here for the ships, David. We're here to make sure the thing down there doesn't crawl ashore." I wouldn't interrupt him. After all these nights, I'm not sure he's wrong. Sometimes, on light fog evenings, I sit at the edge of the metal dock, legs hanging over the black water, listening to the tower breathe through the generator's hum. I think about the keepers before me, the one who documented everything and then jumped, the one who stuffed wax in his ears, the one who sketched tentacles in the margins, the one who marked the Kraken's visits on his calendar. All of them had their own homemade rules to hold on to. I'm no different. It's just my turn. If you're reading this, there are 2 likely reasons. 1, you're the new keeper, freshly dropped onto this rock with a backpack and a toothache, just like I was. 2, you're someone far away, digging through old archives, wondering why an ancient lighthouse still needs a human in the age of satellites. Either way, my advice doesn't change. Don't expect anyone to give you a proper briefing on the weird stuff. The contractor will talk about generators, batteries, lamps, sonar, flares. They'll sign papers, then turn their boat around before you can ask real questions. The real stories live in messy handwritten journals, half-joking tales from fishermen, and things you see with your own eyes at 3 in the morning when every form of communication suddenly dies. Take these rules as a starting point, if you want. Rule 1. Always check the light and the sonar. Don't stare when the screen goes white. Rule 2. Beware the Kraken. It keeps its own schedule, not yours. Rule 3. Ignore the sirens, no matter if they borrow the voice of someone you love or someone you hate. Rule 4. Turn off the light when you see the dead ships. A few seconds of darkness is gentler than whatever you might see if you keep shining on them. You'll add rules of your own. Maybe never go to the dock alone after midnight. Maybe don't run out of coffee before the 2nd week. Maybe don't tell Joey everything if he's still here. Each new rule is a scratch on the surface of something larger, a network of stories scattered across lighthouses, where people keep trying to write laws for things that don't follow any. This job isn't for people who hate being alone. It's not for tourists looking for adventure either. It's for people like me, willing to be forgotten in exchange for a paycheck that can cover root canals and overdue bills. But at some point, standing in the watchroom, staring into the endless black ring of the night sea, you'll realize you're not actually alone. Something is out there. Maybe it hasn't looked up at you directly, but it knows where you are. Some people will tell you it's just nature, just unclassified phenomena. They're not wrong, but like with every ghost story, the frightening part isn't the ghost itself, it's realizing how thin the line is between not yet explained and better left alone. Every time the Kraken brushes the tower, every time a dead ship glides by, every half-heard voice in the wind is a reminder that some secrets work best in the dark. If one day you take a boat away from this place, assuming you leave by boat and not by some other exit, you might end up like me. Every time you hear a ship's horn in a distant city, your heart will skip. You'll see streetlights reflected in a rain puddle and mistake them for that blue glow. You'll turn on a radio and, for 1 second, think the static is someone calling your name. But if you decide to stay, season after season, you'll start noticing the gaps in my story. The nights I chose not to describe. The sonar blips I didn't log. The times Joey went very quiet, staring down at the trench like he could hear something I still couldn't. Maybe one day you'll add your own Rule 5, something I can only half sense and haven't dared to write down. If you do, write it clearly so whoever comes after you won't have to guess. Until then, this is all I can leave behind. A few notebooks, a wall plastered with sonar printouts and Joey's maps, a bunk bed that creaks too much, an old lighthouse that groans whenever the wind shifts, and 4 rules that sound like a joke, but have kept me alive longer than most who've stood here. If you take this job after reading this, remember, it's your choice. No one forced me. No one will force you. It's just that when you stand on the deck of that small supply boat, watching the bare rock and the white tower grow larger out of the gray sea, you'll feel what I felt. A thin, strong thread tugging you off the shore and tying you to a dot on the chart the world barely knows exists. Maybe that thread is money. Maybe it's the desire to disappear. Maybe it's the very same call Rule 3 tells you to ignore. Whatever it is, once you step onto that dock, you'll understand. So, if someday you climb the stairs to the watchroom, backpack on your shoulder, coffee in hand, face still unused to the taste of salt, and find Joey and me sitting there, sit down. We'll brew another pot. Joey will tell you about treasure. I'll hand you this notebook, and before your first shift, I'll repeat it all one more time, slowly, so you remember. Keep the light on. Keep the sonar clean. Don't listen to what you shouldn't. And when you see ships that don't belong to this time, turn the light off. Thank you for listening to Darkwatch Stories. If this story gave you chills, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep bringing you more. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware of what might be watching in the dark.